Glenn. Well, it's a great honor for me this morning to introduce our featured speaker, Charles Hartford. Now, Charles, as you can see in this picture, is a sheep hunter. He's a husband, he's a father, he's a financial advisor, he's a graduate of West Point. He's a very active member of the Boone and Crockett Club. And I think the one thing that he prides himself as much as anything is he's a sheep hunter. Charles and his wife Becca live in La Jolla, California, where they have raised their 4 children and where Charles heads the Hartford Wealth Partner Group at Rockefeller Capital Management. He's a very humble person, and I've always found him a little reluctant to talk about his former career. Next slide, please. So if you look at the guy in the center of the picture there, right under Saddam, you might see a little resemblance to the person that was in that first slide, and that's natural because they're one and the same. They're both Charles Hartford. And for those of you older than 40, you might recall that the biggest news story of 2003 was the March 23rd ambush of a United States Army truck convoy and the subsequent capture of Privates First Class Jessica Lynch and Lori Pistoia. 1 week later, on April 1st, the entire world was captivated when a successful rescue mission was launched. The ground assault commander on that mission was then Major Charles Hartford, our guest speaker today. Oh, and by the way, they made a movie about the raid called Saving Jessica Lynch. I asked my friend Charles a few years ago if he'd ever seen the movie, and in a humble way, he said no, but he was sure that the actor that had portrayed him was tall, dark, and handsome. I hate to break this to you, Charles, in a room of 1,000 people, but next slide, please. This is Ron Hayden, the actor who played you in that movie. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you our featured speaker this morning, Wild Sheep Life member and a true American hero, Charles Hartford.
And Tony, thank you very much for that kind introduction. You failed to mention, among the other accolades, that I was the 7th grade class president 3 years in a row. Hey, listen, everybody, I realize fully being up here that I am the only thing standing between someone in this room and a ram. But between now and then, there's a big mountain of words that I got to get through. I hope everybody's having an absolutely fantastic Sheep Week. I know that I am. Before I go any further, I just want to pause and recognize our veterans. Whether you come from Canada, Mexico, or the United States, if you have served your country, and if you're able, would you please stand and be recognized? Thank you. You know, my parents left California for Sheridan, Wyoming a few years ago. All my nephews go to the University of Wyoming. They're giant Josh Allen fans, giant Buffalo Bill fans. I don't want to take anything away from the outpouring of support and love and prayers that went to a Buffalo Bills player just a couple of weeks ago, but I would be remiss if I did not say or reflect that there are no suspended games or enemy cancellations for our soldiers. So thank you to those who serve and to their biggest fans, their families. Speaking of families, I just want to introduce you to mine. That's my wife, Rebecca, and my family right outside of the Weatherby factory there in Sheridan, Wyoming. I'm going to run through pretty quick a few others and introduce them to you. Son William, who graduated from college, is the reigning Wyoming State Amateur Golf Champion and trying to cut his teeth on the Pro Tour. My daughter Kate, who with my wife Rebecca, right now is on a plane to Norman, Oklahoma to begin an ROTC program there. So super proud of her. And for those that were at Dallas, you may recognize that young man with the shorts. That's John Hartford. and then my son George, and a good friend, my very best friend's beautiful daughter Allie, and then no family could be complete without dogs named Boone and Crockett. Listen, I am no hero. I am not Jim Shockey. I absolutely cannot compete with any of my kids. And I absolutely cannot compete with Alan Smith's latest cookbook. So why me? Upon reflection, I think that Tony asked me to do this 4 months ago because there maybe was a smidgen of hope that I'd be sober Saturday morning. I know what goes on Friday night at this place, and so I had enough warning for that. Son John, you can see here, was recognized last week in Dallas as the Colin Carruthers Youth Hunter of the Year. We're super proud of him. So I'm going to pause there, and I want to go quickly through some priorities around, or just talk a little bit about preparation, starting with priorities. Just ask, what matters? Do our daily actions really reflect our long-term goals? In the Army, I learned there are 3 types of effort: main effort, supporting effort, and wasted effort. Gray noted at our opening on Wednesday night, let's ask, are we doing all that we can to stay and remain relevant and make the biggest impact? That's as critical for us hunters trying to get after an elusive thin horn as it is for an organization. My son John, after he received those awards, had different priorities. Right after he got there, you can see, I think he took as many pictures with beautiful women as he possibly could. In reality, John accepted an appointment to the U.S. Military Academy. He'll be playing rugby at Army beginning this June. The second part of preparation I'd like to talk about is just planning. Plan the adventure. I was reminded of an outfitter from Namibia at the Dallas Safari Club that take as much joy in the planning sequence and getting ready for that amazing hunt as you do on the hunt itself. Listen to other hunters, listen to the pros, talk to guides and outfitters, get your kit right, build muscle memory with your rifle where your ammunition will go. Plan in detail. The better we plan, the better we are to adapt when things change. Like when you acknowledge and realize that a Thule elk tag you bought happened to overlap with a doll sheep hunt that you planned with your best friend 3 years prior, and you have to graciously give her that tag, and she ends up with that while you're hunting sheep in the Yukon. You've got to perspire. We all know in this room, if you've been on a sheep hunt or not, that you've got to put the work in. Talk to the guys at Mountain Tough. They're pros at setting up plans to keep our bodies in shape and keep them there, whether we're in season or not. Lieutenant Colonel Dan Rooney, who started Folds of Honor, that is, by the way, donated over $200 million in scholarships to first responders' kids, says, stay ready so that you don't have to be ready. And by the way, that's my 15-year-old son. I want to assure everybody in this room that I did not Photoshop his head on the top of Tony Caligieri's body. Finally, some persistence, and I learned this one from my best friend from West Point, Mike Opitz. Show some grit, like we learned about that wonderful young lady who got her FNAS at the age of 13. We've got to overcome mostly not just the physical challenges, but also the mental ones. There will come a point where we want to say, man, maybe this is just not for me. Move through it. When you're on that hill or you're on that stair stepper, think that the ram that you're after is just right over the ridge. There is no finish line, and I'm grateful to Mike, who I went through Ranger School with and a whole bunch of life with, for that constant reminder. Thanks, buddy. It gets you to places like that when you persist, and looking at scaled mountains with a great guide that without him you would never be able to get to. The final thing I want to talk about and spend a little bit more time on this morning is perspective. You know, I'm reminded of the recent wildlife study and report of the snail who was mugged at gunpoint by 2 turtles. When the police asked him what happened, the snail replied, "Officer, I honestly have no idea. It happened so fast." You know, that's what perspective does for you, especially with this group of Life and Summit members who give, and this morning, that's overwhelming. Thank you for that ticket. This is a generous group. Perspective has informed you, and you relay that to others. You relay that to the 1,700 plus people who are at the Less Than One event, wanting to get their first sheep. It's incredibly generous, and it comes from a place of knowing how special and how emotional that first hunt can be. For me, perspective comes from several different places, including the mountain. And first, a pretty cool hunting story. I had the great pleasure of hunting in the Yukon with Mike this last August, and you know, the preparation was not enough workouts, way too much luggage. Tony Caligari at the Big Game Awards in Springfield, Missouri said, you know, with a lot more experience on the mountain than me, said, you know, Charles, you cannot have enough socks when you're going on a sheep hunt. And he would graciously provided some great kits, some wonderful bags to get me a little bit more ready. That's Harley. And we're among family here. This is the Wild Sheep family, right? So I can say this, and my wife is on an airplane right now, but I will tell you, I had virtually no experience on a horse at all, and that sweet horse knew more about my groin in 25 minutes than my wife has in 25 years. You get to spend time on the mountain with buddies like Mike, like right there. You get to see panoramic views like this with a guide who's always out in front and always helping prepare for looking and glassing and doing the meals and all the things that make it look so easy when you're trying to rest and overcome all the fatigue that's built up. A last P for me as a Christian man is prayer. And this was a verse that popped up when I was on the mountain, and I think it's appropriate. Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, and be strong. The paraphrase for that for me, by the way, is what I tell my kids when they're whining, and that's just suck it up, buttercup. That's not scriptural, by the way. There's my friend Kid. I'm on Kid following Harley, and he had a great knack for jogging and making me feel things I haven't ever felt before. All right. You know, as I look at these pictures that you're looking at right now, I'm just reminded of the thought that there are no atheists in a foxhole. And I think I can say the same thing when you're on top of the mountain on a saddle and you're looking at a caribou come in, or you're looking at a beautiful horse next to a glassy lake. It's absolutely beautiful. It's just absolutely beautiful. And I don't know that we can ever capture in words what that looks like. And I think that's why sheep hunting is so very, very special. It gets us really close to our roots, and we realize what really is important in life. So for some perspective from that mountain, vast expanses, serenity, quiet, and hard. I understood quickly on my sheep hunt what I could control, my attitude and not giving up, and what I couldn't, which was basically everything else. But preparation and perspective for me was informed also by my service in the Army. And one mission in particular, as Tony mentioned, that I'll share with you this morning. So I know Tony showed some pictures, but that's me 20 years ago. And I want to take you back to me and my family 20 years ago, 2 kids and 3 labs ago. William was 2.5. My daughter Kate, who's on her way to Oklahoma right now, celebrated her first birthday on March the 6th, 2003. I just come back from Afghanistan, and because we really didn't know the cadence of operations quite yet, I went to South Africa to plan training that we would come back and try and do between combat deployments, and then back to Savannah. And then orders, and then another set of orders came. And as she'd done many, many times before, my wife, Becca, dropped me off on Sunday, March the 6th, 2003. That would be the very last time I saw her or had any communication whatsoever with her for 54 straight days. And maybe that's a good thing, because I didn't have a bath or a shower or anything else for 54 straight days either. We didn't have an address, we didn't have email, there was no APO or anything else, so completely separate, and she had no idea where I was. Shortly after getting there, I was on a command and control helicopter and coming through day 2 of a shamal, and some of you may know what a shamal is. It's extremely fine sand in a storm that basically blackens out the sky. I landed early morning on March the 29th, and my sergeant major handed me a hot lemon Pepsi, and it's funny the things that you remember when you reflect. but he said, you're needed in the operations center. There's another mission that's going to happen. And that's the first time I ever heard the word and the name Private Jessica Lynch. Here's what we knew on that night. We knew that Marines from 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, at that point in the war had suffered and sustained more casualties than any other unit of its size in the war so far. We knew that enemy were occupying the city in southern Iraq of Nasiriyah, which is thought to be close to the ancient city of Babylon. And importantly, we had proof of life of Jessica Lynch. She was a fellow American being held in the hospital, and she had sustained casualties that would mean the amputation or the pending amputation of a leg. We planned an operation to rescue her to occur on April the 2nd, but because we thought she would have to lose the leg if we went any later, and because of the operational necessity of moving from South Iraq to North, we've said that the mission was going to go on April the 1st. On the 30th, I flew in to a camp, and I love my Marine friends, I gotta tell you, but they have a knack for doing things the hardest possible way. So they set up an operations center south of the city of 1 million people, by the way, in the city dump. So covered in flies, get hot, extremely hot vehicles. I reconned in broad daylight the routes that we were looking at taking to get into the center of the city and do the rescue operation. This is before we ever heard the word IED, by the way. This is just a map of Nasiriyah. You can see that the Euphrates River runs just to the south of it, and then there's a canal network that runs just to north of the city. On April the 1st, in the night, I led a convoy of 25 vehicles up and east of the city and around to the north, and stopped in a tactical assembly area where Lieutenant Colonel Grabowski was there. And when I say his men had the 100-mile stare, I'm being gracious. They were wiped out. That fine battalion commander looked me in the eye and said, I'm giving you a tank platoon because I have to, but I'm not giving you anybody else. My chaplain is here if you need it. God bless you. He also handed me a paper napkin, and it had the last known location of Jessica Lynch, the second room, hospital room on the right of the second floor of the hospital. But that was not the only information we received when he handed me that paper napkin with a sketch of where she would be. That was the first time that I knew, or that anybody in my organization knew, that there were American remains that were buried somewhere near the hospital, believed to be in a soccer pitch just south of the emergency room. I'm going to come back to this picture, but what I want to show you, and it's a little grainy, is about a 4-minute video of what that mission looked like from the ground. We had some embedded cameras that looked at some different aspects. So would you please go ahead and roll the video?
Overman, Scott F. Sergeant, North Marple. Get out. McKee. bud.
Let him run into us.
That's my convoy.
Tilt rotor back.
Okay, I'm moving to cut our bags. Go ahead, Psycho.
Okay, we got friendlies in front of us.
Roger, I got him. This is impressive.
Put your hands up. Scoot this better. The doctor, myself, Clifton, and Tellsworth in here. All I'm going to do is I'll put cuffs on you. That's what we're doing. Hey, are you in any pain? Okay. Where's those windows go out to, Aaron? It's okay, it's okay. You know? You got that flag still? Still here with you, Jessica.
My main obstacle is going to be that tree right in front of us. Make sure we get a good count, guys, as she comes in.
Roger.
So 3-0.
Are they here yet? What the fuck? Yeah, they're already out.
Can you smile? Can you smile for the family?
So your folks will see
There
how
you
you're
go.
doing? They're going to be
You're
so
doing
glad
great,
to see you.
Jessica. You're
great.
doing wonderful, okay?
Welcome back.
Just like
Okay. Thank you. You know, I moved that convoy of 25 vehicles and all the men that were involved in that from the north of the city. We used tanks and a dozer shovel that was in front of one of them to clear out obstacles that were on fire that were prohibiting movement from the north to the south. We moved from that, and I had the honor to call the first code on our execution checklist to start that assault around that hospital. We moved down essentially Main Street from north to south. We surrounded that hospital and secured the perimeter. When my vehicle turned into the hospital, we received fire. My vehicle was shot. Thank God I had up-plated, up-armored Humvee with bulletproof glass, and I had a young radio operator from Minneapolis, Minnesota, who was trying to keep communications going, and I had to tell him in unkind words to get his fanny down. I didn't want to send a letter to his mom, and we made our way in and had about 15 minutes of a firefight. The last piece of that is what you heard in that video. On the way, I was in the back, right behind the driver of my up-armored vehicle, who was a member of a SEAL team somewhere numbered between 5 and 7, and he stalled our vehicle 3 times on the way to the objective. And I was a heck of a lot calmer in the back of that up-armored Humvee going to the objective than I am right now. And I remember reaching over from my seat and putting my hand on his shoulder and saying, "Listen, brother, it's going to be okay. Just get the vehicle turned back on. We're going to make our way to the objective." From the time I did that, I made that first execution checklist call to move through the objective until the time Jessica Lynch was in the good care of our battalion surgeon was 36 minutes. 36 minutes. Why would we do that? For one reason and one reason only. Not for her gender, her race, color, creed, origin, political party, nothing mattered to the more than 1,000 people that put their lives in harm's way for one. And that was because she was an American. That's all that mattered in getting her out of harm's way and into proper medical care. My commander, then Colonel, now retired 4-star General, thank you. My commander, Colonel Joe Votel, now a retired 4-star General, said to us, and I quote, 71 hours of planning from warning order of the mission until Ranger Hartford went through the breach. 21 different units participating, one of very few prisoner of war or MIA recovery missions in history. Incidentally, my wonderful wife, Rebecca, on the night of that mission, nearly 7,000 miles away, was doing what any concerned wife and mom would do while her husband is being shot at. She was shopping at the outlet malls in Hilton Head, South Carolina. But interestingly, she felt a need to pause when she was shopping with the little kids, our little kids, and a friend of hers named Molly, and say, you know what, I need to step aside and just pray for Charles and his unit. I took a journal of this entire event in my life, and she did as well. And again, she didn't know where I was. We had no communication at all. But when we compared notes, wouldn't you know that she paused during her little shopping trip to pray for me right at the moment, at 20:56 Zulu time exactly, as I was going through that breach and reaching for my SEAL team friend and telling him it's going to be okay, let's get on with this mission. Just an amazing story of faith and prayer. Thank you. You know, like a sheep hunt, things happen. And we got Jessica Lynch out of there, I said, in 36 minutes, just over a half an hour. But we still had another mission, and one that we were not completely prepared for. And that really goes to being prepared with perspiration and persistence to not leave a soldier behind. We knew that there were at least 9 Americans that had been buried, and we explored and found some, and I'm sorry that it's breakfast, but some in the morgue. And under green night optical devices, it's impossible to tell an American from an Iraqi, you just don't know. But their positions where they were obviously tortured. We took those and secured them. And then, for the next 4.5 hours, with a lot of pressure coming from the radio to get back, because they wanted to break the good news of Jessica Lynch's rescue, Rangers dug with their hands to recover those remains. 9 bodies that were in the soccer pitch just south of that hospital emergency room. We loaded those Americans on trucks and got back just as dawn was breaking on April the 2nd. I remember after that mission, going into the operations center, and at the time, news was just starting to break that there was a successful rescue mission like Tony had mentioned. And I remember a news reporter interviewing an African-American man and asking him what he felt about the rescue of Jessica Lynch. And he looked at her and said, "We're grateful. We're so happy for the Lynch family. We're delighted she was rescued, and we can only hope the same for our own daughter, who is a member of the same unit." And I looked into his eyes from thousands of miles away, knowing something that he just didn't, that his daughter was not going to return home alive, that she was in the back of my truck. And then I thought about my own daughter, who had just turned 1, and all the time that man was going to miss with his own. I wrote in my journal on April the 2nd how I miss just watching William and Kate play. You know, much is said about thinking outside the box. Organizations use the term to promote initiative. Entrepreneurs use it for creativity. Montana State's motto is think outside. Soldiers and sailors know the importance of mail and getting something yelled at mail call and a letter thrown ungraciously your way, or coming back from a mission and on your cot is a box wrapped in brown paper, and inside that box, something nice, something that just reminds you from home. Maybe it's a bunch of stale cookies that were mailed months in advance, or a book to read, or some foot powder, but really just an expression of someone thinking about you, that you love and that loves you, and that you left when you deployed. When I reflect on that second mission, I find myself thinking not inside the box or outside the box, but rather inside the box. And that box that I'm thinking of isn't a care package that's mailed from home. That box is not adorned with U.S. postage. That box is adorned with the United States flag that be folded 13 times in a ceremony and presented to a grieving and hurting family on behalf of a grateful nation. Notice of that box isn't done with a yell at a mail call, but rather with the somber, soft knock of a white-gloved hand on the front door of a family. I've had to make that knock, and it's among the hardest things I've ever had to do in my entire life. And inside that box is a priceless American treasure. An American man or woman who, like every other American who's ever raised her or his right hand to swear an oath of allegiance, did so not to a party, not to a person, but to uphold the ideals found in our Constitution. Now, 20 years later, in quiet moments in a stand on a stock in that beautiful Yukon country and territory, or in Mexico on a hunt with my own daughter, I find myself more and more not thinking outside the box, but in it and of it. My personal preparation is embedded with reflection that helps give me, maybe like snails and turtles, a different, deeper perspective than just the one found from above the timberline or glassing from a valley floor. What about yours? Consider, why do we do the things we do? Why gather with others the way we do? Why give the amounts that you all do? I think it's because we know, and especially life members know, that our legacy and our obligation of leaving the mountain and its sheep stronger and healthier than we found them is much like the price of freedom. Both come with a cost. The first with our time and talent and treasure. The second with the blood and sacrifice of true heroes. So be prepared, prioritize, plan, persist, perspire, find perspective, and pray. It's my hope that until our next family gathering, one very short year from now, we all remain vigilant in our resolve to nurture the wild that inspires us, to enjoy that wild with people we cherish and love, and to forever do so under the panorama of freedom. God bless you. God bless Mexico. God bless Canada and everybody else. And God bless America. Thank you.